Good afternoon. My name is Uchenna Okoye, and I am a Zuckerman Fellow and an MD MPH candidate here at the Harvard School of Public Health. It is with great honor that I introduce this afternoon's distinguished guest, Dr. Harvey Fineberg. Dr. Feinberg has served as the president of the Institute of Medicine since July of 2001 and was inducted into the Institute in 1982. As president of the Institute of Medicine, Dr. Feinberg oversees numerous boards, forums, and roundtables in providing objective, unbiased, and expert advice in the nation's most pressing issues on health and healthcare, ranging from vaccine safety and healthcare quality to prevention and management. Dr. Feinberg's academic career has been dedicated to the fields of health policy and medical decision-making. His past research has focused on the process of policy development and implementation, the evaluation and use of vaccines, and the assessment and dissemination of medical innovations. Dr. Feinberg has received numerous honorary awards and degrees. The most recent is from Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health, which awarded Dr. Feinberg the highest prize in public health, the Frank A. Calderon Prize, presented to an individual who has made a transformational contribution to the field. Dr. Feinberg is truly a Harvard native. He received his bachelor's from Harvard College, MD from Harvard Medical School, master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government, and PhD in government from Harvard's Graduate School of the Arts and Sciences. Dr. Feinberg served as the dean here at the Harvard School of Public Health for 13 years. Lastly, I would like to share a quote from Dr. Feinberg from a 2011 Harvard Kennedy School article that may speak to many of us. He stated, "I am a doctor. There is a special satisfaction in the one-on-one relationship you have with patients that is unlike anything else from a professional point of view. But it's still one person at a time. With the work we're doing at the Institute of Medicine, we have the chance to affect the lives of millions of people." We thank you, Dr. Feinberg, for speaking with us, but also for your wisdom, your leadership, and most importantly, for your example. Before I turn the seminar over to Dean Frank, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Harvey V. Fineberg.
Thank you, Uchenna. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this series, which we call Decision-Making Voices from the Field. And the name says everything. It's about understanding how leaders make decisions. We're delighted today to welcome Harvey Fineberg back to Harvard. As you've heard, he's the legendary dean of Harvard School of Public Health for 13-year provost of Harvard University, actually defining the role of the provost, and really an accomplished leader, and currently as president of the Institute of Medicine. This session is being webcast worldwide. Since we started this series, literally hundreds of thousands of people have watched the various programs, and I'm sure we'll have a wide viewership for today as well, and I hope that our online viewers will enjoy the interaction as much as all of those who are here in the room will do so. Here we have mostly students, faculty, and senior leadership fellows from the Harvard School of Public Health joining us today. Dr. Feinberg is a very special person because he actually brings a lot of wisdom to the theme of this series. And he's going to be reflecting on issues of decision-making, both individual and social decision-making among health professionals. But he is truly, in his academic life, a recognized leader in the study of decisions. That's his own field of work, decision-making as a field of work. In addition, he himself has had to make major decisions in the various leadership positions he has occupied. And today, he is the president of an organization whose mission, the Institute of Medicine, is to inform decision-making, to allow decision makers to make enlightened decisions. So he brings a unique perspective from all of these angles. So I'd like to get us started before we open it up for questions from the audience. Harvey, by asking you to give us an example or two of decisions that you have personally have found challenging to make. How hard is it to make decisions, and why? And bringing those three lenses I think your reflections will be very, very valuable.
Well, thank you so much, Julio. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is for me to be here with you, with our students, and particularly back here at the Harvard School of Public Health. I feel a little bit like an exotic plant that's being repotted in its native soil when I return, and it feels very good to be in such wonderful surroundings and to have good friends here. I will tell you, in thinking about this question of decision making, I was reflecting on one what may seem like a rather trivial decision when I was a dean. If you go downstairs, you'll notice in the main cafeteria area there's a piano. There wasn't always a piano there. It was a time we did not have a piano. But we made a decision at a certain point in my deanship that we were going to acquire a piano. And we had a little committee of student musicians and a few faculty, and I, of course, since I was interested in the piano, as the committee to choose the piano. And one day, we actually had a little expedition where we had a group of the students and I were driving to the factory where the piano was being made, at that time Falcone factory in a different part of Massachusetts. And so there was a lot of discussion about which piano and the kind of features we were looking for and the qualities in the piano. But on the way back, after we'd made the decision, one of the students said to me, similarly to the way you started, Julio, she said, you specialize in making these decisions, thinking about decisions. Do you always follow the dictates of the formal analysis of decisions in making your own choices? And I said, of course, as long as it feels right. And I think this is really the key. Making good decisions, I believe, is partly intellectual and partly emotional. It's partly knowing what you believe the evidence shows and also gauging that against your values and what you think is right and also against what you think you can accomplish. Because very often choices and decisions, even if you think you have the authority to make them in a leadership role, you really don't have the complete authority. I was reminded of the wisdom of Richard Neustadt, who was a great student of the American presidency, a professor here at Harvard, but before that at Columbia University. And he wrote a book called Presidential Power. And it was catapulted into the popular mind when then candidate Kennedy, as a candidate for the presidency, was photographed clutching this book, Presidential Power, to his bosom as he was boarding a plane. And everyone then said, what is that book? Too bad his hand was covering the name of Neustadt, but people eventually got to the author and the book. And this book was really a break with the past, because every other study of the American presidency and the power of the presidency, the decision-making authority of the president, always started with Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States, enumerating the powers of the president and what the president could do. Neustadt, who had been in the White House way back in even the Truman administration, had come to a very different view of the presidency. And he said, essentially, presidential power is the power to persuade. And he said, rather than what we all had been taught in grade school about the United States government as separation of powers, he said it's separate branches sharing powers. And really this idea that leadership and decision-making is a large part persuasion, I think is a pretty good model whether you are in a group or leading a school or leading a university or leading a business or leading anywhere. So how do you persuade? And what does it mean to be persuasive? I can tell you there's one faculty member here at the Harvard School of Public Health. I won't divulge the identity to protect the guilty, but this faculty member once observed that in his view, consensus building was that we will keep talking until you agree with me. And that's a good philosophy as long as you have an inexhaustible source of time and you can keep going indefinitely. But really, persuasion is about understanding in the first instance common interests, shared values, and making the case in a way that is persuasive. Now, it's not easy for any of us even to persuade ourselves, much less to be persuaded by another. Let me ask you just to reflect for a moment. When was the last time on anything important to you that you actually changed your mind? When did you ever change your mind about something important to you that you can think about and remember? For most of us, it's pretty hard even to think of one example. And yet, in public health or in leadership, all the job is about leading people to come to fresh ways of looking at the world, fresh ways of understanding, fresh ways of doing, new insights, new choices, new decisions. So one thing that I've learned in my study of decision making, which I devoted most all of my academic career to looking at decisions from what you would call a rational point of view, trying to analyze the pros, the cons, the achievements, the limitations, the risks, the costs, the benefits, all the things that you're taught in classes about analyzing decisions. But there's an entirely different school of work and understanding, not about how people should make decisions, but about how people actually do make their choices. This is a part of the behavioral economics, the psychology of choice and decision making, pioneered particularly by people like Kahneman and Tversky, and they reveal that many of our choices are not really grounded in the same principles that we would like to think ought to guide our choices from a rational point of view, from a point of view of what the real advantages and drawbacks are. And so a big challenge for leadership, and something I think about a lot, is how do you reconcile what you think should be done with how you recognize people actually will make their choices. And I've come to believe myself that when we as students of science or lovers of evidence condition ourselves time and again to adhere to the facts and to set aside the anecdote, the story, the one-off case, because it's not evidence. You know, the plural of anecdote is not evidence. Still, we need to simultaneously be guided by where we want the choice to be, which is the rational part, and how we get there, which can be appealing to people through stories, through identification, through emotion, and not be afraid to use the tools of the storyteller and the reporter and the communicator to accomplish the goals that are otherwise based on evidence, grounded in science, and we believe the right thing to do. And this is not easy, but I think if we can pull together the best of both the direction of where we should go and how to get there, how to persuade, then I think as a leader you have a chance to accomplish more than if you are stuck only on the evidence and science, in which case you accomplish less, or devoted entirely to the emotion and personal appeal, in which case you may accomplish more, but maybe the wrong things.
That's very insightful. You know, this is incredibly useful because this series came out of the demand from our own students. And Natalie Myers, the president of the student government, is here with us. most of them will go out into the world and be faced with making decisions. So understanding these multiple dimensions, and of course the power of emotion for the persuasive part, not just the making of decisions, but then using the authority of a position to actually persuade others.
Yes.
I think it's a great point. But let me ask you just a quick follow-up. I mean, you had this very varied career, as in the quote that Uchenna was reading. You are a physician, then you decided to go and look at societal problems and got a PhD in public policy from the Kennedy School. You've been in multiple roles, and now at a position where you are actually not just very close and witnessing in Washington decision making, but actually shaping that through some of the reports and the convening authority of the IOM. In all of these positions, making decisions, from the piano to, many other decisions, has there been? Do you find a principle, a unifying principle? Is there something between pure reason, the evidence side, and emotion that one could call a series of principles that also shape that? And is there such a principle or series of principles that you have found that would apply to many of the decisions that you have taken in different settings?
It's a very good question. I will begin maybe by reflecting on what I like about my current position. Because as some of you know, the Institute of Medicine is part of our national academies. It's a freestanding, it's an independent body, but it has a charter from the US Congress to give advice, and its purpose is to help the country to make better choices. So what I love to tell people is that I am based in Washington, and my only job responsibility is to tell the truth. And you can sleep very well at night. And it's a partial answer to your question. I think a principle is you want to be truthful to both yourself and to others. So you want to be true to what you believe, and you also want to be truthful as a guiding principle, as a way of protecting the only real assets you have, whether you're an academic or a leader or an advisor, and that is your integrity, your credibility, the expectation that you will be telling the truth based on evidence, guided by facts. And if you can start with that principle, then I think many other good things can follow. Another that I would say is listening. The majority of persuasion is not talking. The majority of persuasion is listening. So being an astute listener is very, very important. I'm often reminded of something that my father told me, which is, you seldom learn very much while you are talking. And that's a pretty good lesson also. So being a good listener, especially if you are of an academic background and grew up in a family with your sibs and lots of vying for attention and position, it's very important not to feel you have to prove you're the smartest person in every room. Because, first of all, you're most likely not, and certainly not about everything. And most especially not about the things you really most need to know, which is the appreciation of the other's point of view. You have to gain that if you're going to be effective in persuasion. So careful listening and attending to the other's point of view would be another guiding principle that I would say after the core idea of integrity and honesty. And then once you can think about what you are trying to accomplish from the vantage point of a factual and honest foundation and a genuine openness and hearing, astute listening to others, then there's the challenge of integration, synthesis, development of your ideas with others. And if you, again, don't feel it's necessary to get all the credit for the idea. You're much more likely to have people like the idea. And that's another principle. Don't worry about the credit. So if you start with those three, I would say it's a pretty good start for guiding principles.
Those are great. I would summarize them as integrity. You said that. Probably empathy is the second one, right?
Yeah.
Because when you listen, you're able to put yourself in the place of those who will be affected by your decisions.
Yeah.
And then the third one is generosity, the ability to share, and even in the credit. And it's a nice notion that while you do that based on the evidence, adherence to those principles also makes the emotional connection that surrounds decision making so much more powerful.
Yeah.
So great words of wisdom. Let me open it up for questions from our audience and see who wants to. I'm sure they've been listening very well after what you said. So Walter Willett, please.
Thanks for joining us again, Harvey. And I did have a chance to study you for quite a while when you were dean and I was department chair here. In fact, I did, I think, learn quite a bit about decision making. And I was going to raise the point, but in fact, you did say it, that I never got a sense of persuasion when you were here. You're trying to persuade us about anything. What my lesson was listening. And it was really an interesting process whereby you did listen, and then at the end, you almost didn't have to persuade anybody. You had heard them, and the answers seemed to flow out of that in a way that was then, I think, wise and acceptable. So I just want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Walter. If I had known that, I'd have called on you sooner. But it's nice to see you and wonderful to hear. You know, sometimes it does fall out naturally, and other times there's a real contention. I can remember when we were debating, and you were part of this discussion in the faculty. I remember when early on we were debating tobacco research. Do you remember those debates in the faculty? This was a very, now it seems in retrospect kind of obvious, but I can tell you when I began as dean, this is how ancient it is, we still had smoking in our facilities. We allowed smoking. If you can, a school of public health, and we allowed smoking. And we actually moved in a progression in those years. We had a year in which we had a smoking lounge, and then we had a year in which we did permit people to smoke in private places, and then we eliminated smoking. So we did it gradually, but the real contentious issue was amongst a certain number of faculty who had accepted funding for research from the tobacco interests. It was not really the companies directly, it was something called the Tobacco Institute. It was direct funding by the companies. And it turned out really the motivation behind this was not that they were doing research on cigarettes or even on pulmonary function or anything connected directly to cigarettes. They were maybe doing molecular biology or some other remote science. The purpose was that the Tobacco Institute wanted to be able to list these eminent scientists from different institutions whom they had funded without even indicating what the results would be. And so the question came up, do you permit this research to go on? And the faculty who accepted this research basically argued that there were fewer restrictions, more support than they could get from government grants and certainly from foundations. So what was the problem? And that took persuasion. That was not just a matter of hearing everyone at the first instance and a good solution falling out. And it took time. And in a way, all of us thinking together in the different positions, and eventually everyone who had that agreed that they would not continue it. But it was done by honest dialogue. And it was a good example, but not that was easy.
You know, before entertaining another question, just a little follow-up on this, and maybe something you want to reflect more broadly. I mean, you were talking about the funding of research, and of course, for us, that's very, very prominent nowadays when we're dealing with the consequence of sequester and the difficulties in reaching agreement on funding of anything, including research. And it strikes me that, probably, as I was listening to you, the three principles that you very eloquently, of always telling the truth, listening, reminded me of some author who said, there's an anatomical metaphor here that we should pay attention. We have one mouth and two ears. So if we keep that ratio, listen twice as much as you talk, you probably, but you look at that, and then generosity, the capacity to share in credit. Those two principles don't seem to be guiding decisions on public funding of science today in Washington. What are your thoughts about, no one would now think of going back, obviously, to the tobacco industry at all. I mean, time has proven that your decision was actually quite right. But what's the future of funding for research, especially if the difficulty in making decisions in Washington when it comes to the allocation of public funding for research means that universities and other places need to look for alternative sources. What are your reflections on what's going on in the current climate around funding for research?
Yeah. Well, first, we have a very difficult overall political climate in Washington, mainly because of polarization, of extreme views on both sides, very much rigidity, a sense of antagonism rather than any sense of joint common cause. So that's the foundation against which you begin. Historically, there's a long tradition in which research, and particularly biomedical research, has actually been supported generously across the political spectrum. It's not been a partisan issue, and so if there's any kind of glimmer of hope around the research enterprise, it is its breadth of appeal, the range of appeal for research, the conviction of the benefits of research across a wide range of political views on other topics. So that is a plus. But in the current climate, everything, whether it's biomedical research or even the defense establishment, is suffering from a reduction in overall funding. Personally, if you ask me, well, what needs to be done specifically on research, my own preferred solution, which is admittedly, you could say, politically far-fetched, but really, I believe research should be treated on a 3-year rolling budget basis, so that you don't have this annual seesaw in which there's abundance or famine, all unpredictably coming along on a sudden basis. But rather, you could allow every year a budget to be allocated, but it would be, in effect, the 3rd or 4th year hence, so that there would be a guaranteed line of funding for a period of time. What research really needs, I believe, is the stability and security of its trajectory, then allowing within that more flexibility for allocation choices of investment where new fields are emerging or where the needs and opportunities may be greatest. We had someone, I believe, put forward a suggestion, I will say, just as it is, that biomedical research in the United States could be regionally distributed and allocated on that basis. That seems to me a wrong-minded way to think about it. I do believe that we need to strengthen research in many areas, but it's not purely by geography. It's by field, by geography, by investigators and more. And I think it would be wrong-minded to do that as a kind of partial solution. The prospects over time will depend on the longer-term prospects of improvement in the decision-making climate in Washington, and it's hard to predict whether that will occur or in what time frame. Right now, we are in a very precarious position and particularly difficult for biomedical research.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
My name is Zach Nider. I'm a first-year student in the master's program in health policy and management. And my question is, I've been reading a little bit about, there's a kind of growing consensus that oftentimes when we make decisions as human beings, our first reaction is kind of emotional, and then the reasoning sort of catches up and oftentimes really just justifies that initial emotional response. And that would seem to pose difficulties for public health, in which oftentimes the issues are emotional, but we want people to act rationally, to look at the evidence. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to, in terms of persuasion that you discussed earlier, kind of methods for appealing to people to focus on the non-emotional response to difficult decisions.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Zach, for your question. Your main point is one that some very thoughtful analysts would agree with. I had the opportunity to hear Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who was awarded a Nobel Prize for his path-breaking work related to what is behavioral economics. He received the economics Nobel Prize. And as a psychologist, he had spent his career really studying how people really make their decisions. And he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which was recognized by an award given by our National Academy's Keck Futures Initiative. And at the ceremony where he was receiving this award, he made an observation which was very much in line with your observation. He said that many of us like to think that people use the evidence to then make a decision or a choice. He said in his view, most often it's inverted, that people have come to a conclusion or begin with a choice, and they then recognize the evidence which supports their choice. Now, if that is the case for most choices and decisions, we really do have a challenge in public health where we are trying to inform and to alter perceptions and understanding. I think a first lesson for us in the main is that we cannot expect overnight results. If we're in the field of public health, you had better be in for the long haul, because it's not a short-term quick fix. You have to stay with it. Look at the tobacco question again. It took decades since the first Surgeon General report in the mid-1960s, at which time tobacco was at a peak in use in the US. It took a long time before the laws, the culture, the expectations, and then individual behavior all caught up. It's mostly now no longer acceptable to assume that when you visit a friend that you can just light up in their house. I mean, I think almost no one in today's culture would even imagine doing that without, in the minimum, asking, or most likely just presuming they'd better excuse themselves and go outside if they're still addicted to tobacco. And in a way, that cultural change took place because of evidence, and especially also side stream smoke and secondhand effects. But evidence was the foundation. Cultural change, cultural dynamics, and individual education, medication, all played a part. And I think for most of the changes, the fundamental changes, whether we're talking about lifestyle choices or habits or diet, the nutrition, any of the things that we know over time would have a profound effect in the population, they all take time. And we have to adopt a recognition that it's a combination of cultural underpinning, individual education, incentives, laws, regulation, repeated information, all contributing to that kind of a change. And elsewise, I think we don't have any chance of succeeding.
Great. Please.
My name is Shane Kiernan. I'm a first year in the 2-year Health Policy and Management program as well. Similar to Zach's question, actually, and on the synopsis that Dean Frank mentioned, the whole idea of empathy, generosity, those issues, how do you balance them? And I'd be really interested to hear an example from yourself with an ethical dilemma that conflicts with those sort of fundamental values. It'd be good to hear your own experiences.
With an ethical dilemma that conflicts with generosity and empathy. Ah, that's an interesting challenge. Well, it's true there are some people it's very hard to be repeatedly generous with. I will say that. When you're a dean, you don't always see everyone at their very best. So there is that. So that's a test. But you're thinking of you'd like to maybe hear of a case where there was a tension here between the two. Well, I will say where we had to induce generosity. We like every school, maybe every year you feel this a degree, but some years it's worse than others. We had financial difficulties. Now, what did that mean? It meant that there was a dip in or at least a slowing down of our pace of research and financing, and we didn't want to do more on tuition because we already wanted to have a balance of tuition scholarship monies, and so that wasn't open so well to change, and we were in a very tough financial year. And this wasn't so much requiring generosity on the part of the dean, but it did require a sense of solidarity and generosity on the part of the faculty and staff, because what we came to was a decision that we would all delay any change in our adjustment in our salaries for at least a semester, and then reassess the situation. Now, we were able to do that and really get pretty uniform agreement about it, even though none of us liked it, because everyone could examine the facts and think about alternative choices. And it was evident when you really boiled it down that this was the least bad way and most fair way and most, I'll say, socially appropriate way for us to deal with the reality of the situation. And I was very proud of the faculty that they came to that conclusion. Now, that wasn't exactly a conflict with generosity, but it required the induction of generosity of spirit because you could feel you were all in it together. And that was, I think, a part of the key to that particular crisis as it seemed at the time. Looking back, you say, well, no one had to change their place of living because there was a crisis or lost any great material gain, but at the time it seemed pretty significant and quite controversial. But it worked. We worked its way through. When I'm in the case of the current place that I am at the Institute of Medicine, we often will produce reports or recommendations that do not make someone happy. And that occurs. I'll give you an example. After the enactment of the Affordable Care Act, there's provisions in the Act about the coverage of preventive services, which are very good. And all of us in public health like that. There are certain minimum requirements, but there are certain questions that were left open. One of the questions that was unsettled in the law was what would constitute essential preventive services, particularly for women. and were there special needs that women had that ought to be recognized under the law. And so the Department of Health and Human Services asked the Institute of Medicine to assemble a committee to answer that question, which we did, and which the committee did. And in their report, they recommended 8 or so special preventive and clinical services that should be covered as essential services for women, including contraception and abortion. The Secretary received this report and adopted it and issued the regulations to say that the law now, or the regulations for insurance, should require that they include contraception and abortion. There followed a bit of a stir. And in particular, the government is still under suit by the Catholic Church about the requirements to cover women for these services. Now, the government made some adjustments. It said if you are the church, if you are a religious entity that has these beliefs, you do not have to provide this coverage. As employees, if you're an employee of the church itself, you don't have to cover. So then the opponents said, well, what about the employees of church-affiliated organizations, the universities like Notre Dame, or hospitals that are church-affiliated? What about those employees? And there the government first said, well, no, they still have to be covered. And then it came back and said most recently, the insurers have to cover them, but the employer does not have to explicitly include that in the insurance that it provides. So it pushed the responsibility up a level to the insurers. Thus far, that's not proved completely ameliorating of the problem. It's still under active suit, and we'll see how that plays out. But there's a case where you might say there's a real contention of values. In the instance where the Institute of Medicine did the work, it was all in the view of the committee and of the institute, based on evidence about clinical needs and consequences. But it does have a value controversy attached to it, and it's a very contentious issue even to this day. I can give you another examples where, in a way, it's easier because it's not so much values, it's wrong-mindedness that's in the opposition. But we had, for example, studies that were chaired by Dr. Marie McCormick here at the Harvard School of Public Health and Harvard Medical, but she chaired a series of studies on the safety of vaccines. And those studies, which found some areas of risk, also dealt specifically with the question of autism. And that report, which was the last in a series, the committee essentially reported that it could find no evidence based on good studies that would connect either the vaccines or a preservative that's in the vaccines to the development of autism. Now, the reason that it's in the minds of people that there could be a connection, or in some minds that there is, because the age at which you develop first symptoms of autism is typically also an age at which you're receiving immunizations. So there's a natural connection. And there were members of Congress, one grandfather in particular, who was absolutely persuaded that his grandson developed autism, which was just a month after an immunization, thinking that it had to be the immunization. Well, this continues as a controversy. It was a very contentious period. It still crops up from time to time, but it's an easy one, easier for me, because the evidence is all you have to go by. So you can try to be empathetic, and you do want to know and understand why people feel this way. If you're interested, as Zach is, in public health effectiveness, you have to understand why people do not accept vaccines and you have to understand how you can reach them and what would be persuasive and what would be useful in enabling them to do the right thing for their children. But this is a case of controversy, but not grounded in values problem, really more in a failure to accept the preponderance of evidence.
We actually had a forum here on the question of vaccine safety. Marie McCormick was here among others. And I think it does illustrate that two of those components of decision making can actually clash. I mean, when the emotions actually get in the way of the rational side.
Yes.
Whereas, probably the enlightened way is when you use the emotions to leverage the right decision based on evidence. But this is an example where they actually conflict.
Yeah.
Or whether when, as in the case of the essential services for women, when you actually have different value sets, which I think was the sense of the question. What I, and I think, understanding again, emphasizing the empathy side is crucial. But what came clear on that discussion on vaccines is also how other actors may exploit that situation to actually generate systematic doubts about science. And it's a topic we recently had a discussion also on some of the controversial findings on the effects of obesity and things like that. Of course, the tobacco companies exploited that, the idea of inconclusiveness of research. And it's when it gets then exploited to deliberately misguide people that I think we're talking about of a different set of situations.
Yes. Well, if you have, as we have in the world, interests that are at stake, and I mean not just values and beliefs, but financial interests, commercial needs, imperatives for retaining power or achieving some other goal that individuals or companies or institutions represent, then you have distortions naturally being introduced in the question of evidence. And indeed, we have to recognize in ourselves how our own goals and desires and values shape our perception of evidence. I don't want to just pick on tobacco, but there's such a big target, But I can remember so vividly watching with kind of my mouth agape at the testimony when the presidents of the tobacco companies were called before the Congress. And one after another, they were asked, do you believe that tobacco is an addictive substance? And each of them said no, 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 no. I mean, right down the line. And you just wonder what planet do the companies operate from that they could be so insulated from the evidence. Do they believe that tobacco causes cancer? Even that they couldn't quite bring themselves to acknowledge publicly. And then, of course, if you did, how do you sleep at night, or how do you live with yourself if that's what your goal is, to purvey a product that used as intended kills people? So that's a pretty tough thing to reconcile in one's own mind. So you have, it's obvious in others, but it's very hard to recognize in ourselves when our own beliefs and convictions are conditioned in analogous ways to what we value and what we hold close to us. So in a way, I think it's not to divorce ourselves from our values, it's to try our best to adhere to the right values. And then our beliefs and our convictions get guided by what's good and what is true, rather than by what is just in our own or someone else's interest.
Right. It comes down to the first of your principles
so.
Of integrity. I mean,
Yeah.
The only way you preserve is if you develop the reputation that you're a person who actually tries to tell the truth, no matter how many other elements go. But that's the longer term asset that we need to build in public health.
Yeah.
Another question.
I'm Julieta Coro. I'm a fourth-year medical student at UCSD. I'm currently in a one-year master's program in policy and management. Not to hamp on the tobacco stuff, I worked with a U.S. congressman on FDA regulation of tobacco, and that actually landed me here to want to study policy and management. But one of the questions that sort of resonated in my mind when you talked about these guiding principles of integrity, empathy, and generosity is sort of the role of mentorship and identifying key leaders all throughout your experiences, and what is the sort of best way to teach leadership, because that's sort of the thing that I'm thinking about. I'm going to leave here, I'm going to go back, and really how do I take these principles and really put them to action, as well as identify mentors that could sort of provide advice, as well as provide some of their own personal experiences as well. So I wonder if you can highlight who those people were and how you identified those throughout your career.
Well, I was very fortunate in my life to have a number of people that I looked up to and from whom I learned a lot. I think I mentioned my father's saying about learning only when you're listening, and so that was a very important figure for me. But also many of my teachers along the way from every stage of school. I can identify things that even now I connect to more emotionally than intellectually. One thing that I will say, and I don't know if it's true for your experience, but if you think back to the moments that were very special in your interaction with a teacher or a mentor, very few of mine were part of the formal classroom experience. Almost everyone I can think of was incidental to the main thing you thought you were doing, which was sitting in class, learning and interacting in class. It was something outside of that or in addition to that. So one key I would say is if you want to be a teacher who is teaching, be available, and be available in ways that are not just through the conventional ways. And then I think you just have to model what you're trying to teach. So if you are the mentor and the leader that you're trying to teach people to be, that's the best way, because they'll learn more from observing you and wanting to emulate you than they will from what you'll tell them.
Great. We have time for a couple of questions, so we'll go there and then.
Hi, my name is Gary. I'm a one-year MPH program in healthcare policy. I would like to just ask if you could share an experience in your career where you had made a wrong decision and share some insights, your insights. Why do you think people make wrong decisions and what we can do about it?
Okay. It's, I'm thinking of, I was thinking of a book called Being Wrong by Catherine Schultz. And it's a wonderful book. And she writes, how does it feel to be wrong? And her answer is, it feels exactly like being right. What feels bad is recognizing that you were wrong. That's what feels bad. So when did you recognize that you were wrong? Well, I've made some errors. Certainly, I would say some usually inadvertent. I mean, an error is often inadvertent. Oftentimes for me, it's been in dealing with people. I can remember when, I'll give you a tiny example that'll illustrate a bigger problem. When I first became the dean, announced as the dean, before I became dean, one of the staff with whom I'd been working for years as a faculty came up to me sort of in the hall and said, now that you're going to be dean, can we still call you Harvey? And I, thinking, I knew her really well, and I was just thinking I'd make a joke, I said, well, as long as it's Dean Harvey. And I could see that her face dropped, and she felt like, oh my gosh, she'd made some terrible blunder. And it took me about 3 days to reassure her that, it really was okay to call me Harvey. Well, that's a trivial example, but I've insulted people inadvertently along the way. And, it's very, you have to, when you're in a leadership position, you really have to remember that it's a lot harder for whoever is there with you than it is for you. And what you say can be construed in a hurtful or misinterpreted way very, very easily. So I would say I've made mistakes by inadvertently insulting or causing pain for people, and I really try to recognize that and fix it.
We'll go with Natalie and then Uchina, and then we'll have to wrap up. So, Natalie, please.
Thank you so much for your insight. My name is Natalie Myers. I'm a second-year Master of Science in the Global Health and Population and also the President of Student Government. So as you've heard, Dean Frank is really big on trying to teach the future public health leaders. And so I'm just wondering from your perspective, and there's a lot happening at HSPH right now around changing the curriculum and what's the best way to create leaders and to educate leaders. So just wanted to hear a bit from you on what some of your advice would be for future leaders academically as well as experience.
Well, Natalie, the fact that you're the president of student government is a great example of what I would say, because I would say if you want to learn to be a leader, be a leader. And being a leader doesn't mean you're the dean or the chairman of a department or the head of a center. A leader means that you are bringing the best out of your colleagues. It means that you are putting forward a vision of what the group or the team should accomplish, and listening. It means that you're the one who is willing to do more than your share. It means that you are the one who is able to articulate on behalf of the group what the sentiment of the group is. It means that you're the one who can get people to do more than they thought they could accomplish because you're modeling it. So my advice, if you want to learn to be a leader, just be a leader. Be a leader at progressively more and more challenging positions. That's, to me, how you learn to be the leader you want to be. And it sounds to me like you're off to a good start.
So we heard first from you, Chena, so you'll have the last question.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Feinberg. My question is around the role of bias in decision-making. Many of us have heard stories or read studies about patients who present for care with the exact same symptoms, but based upon their race and their gender, they may get referred for cardiac catheterization less than other patients. And so my question to you is, how do medical education and public health training teach individuals, future physicians, future public health providers, to limit, if not eliminate, bias from their decision-making processes, such that no matter which individual or community is before them, their decisions are based upon integrity, evidence, empathy, and generosity?
The first key, I believe, is you have to expose and recognize the biases, the prejudices, the preconceptions, all the things that actually enable most people most days to get through their lives in a simpler way. I mean, the reason we have these stereotypes and preconceptions is because they're very useful heuristics in managing your day. That's just a kind of human nature. But most of us don't realize the strength and depth that these preconceptions hold in our mind. So part of the answer, I think, is exposing them, airing them, discussing them. There's some wonderful studies and tests now that you can do which show the kind of preconscious bias in terms of the speed of response and associations of words and images that can reveal the presence of unconscious biases, but then make them evident so that those of us who would go through a test like that could actually see the quantitative evidence, the undeniable reality of our own predisposition. So the start is exposure, discussion, and examination of the consequence. And then I think that you have to work at it. You have to actually work at it. You measure what is being done, and you actually demonstrate the freedom progressively from these kind of constricting stereotypes and biases that inhibit optimal care. So that would be, to me, the key steps: exposure, recognition, measurement, and sticking to it.
Well, we could stay here for another hour just in this engaging conversation. I want to thank Harvey Fineberg for, you just had a display of everyone who knows Harvey appreciates the most, which is his wisdom. In fact, I think he is exactly the embodiment of those three things: integrity, empathy, and generosity. For many, many years, every time I have to make any professional decision, I always talk to Harvey, and you have seen why, because he is not just a person who has studied decisions and has made decisions, but who has been incredibly generous. And since he's back in his school, I want to say that almost every good thing you see around the school, including the piano, came from wise decisions from Harvey Fineberg. So I want to thank him very, very much for being back here with us. And I want to thank all of you for being such a wonderful audience with such fantastic questions. Thank you.
Thank you all.